you guys doing? Hello to you guys online as well. My name is Pastor Donnie this morning, and it's Pastor Donnie every day, but especially this morning. I get a chance to share with you guys, to talk with you guys about a brand new series. And I tell you what, I got to give props to our design team and our digital design. I said I wanted this series to look something between Catch Me If You Can and that new series on Amazon, The Chosen, and they just killed it. So I love the fact that they did that. And of course, Eric, good job, band, good job. That was a great cover. I love the fact that he covered that song. It is interesting and how appropriate that song has a lot to do with sort of a hook-up culture. Yeah, I'm just one call away. I'm just one call away. And I think it's also appropriate that we're doing that in a nightclub. We're talking about it in a nightclub, so yeah, it's very appropriate. Now, I do have to say, and there's a lot of generations, there's a lot of ages here, and those online, the word hooked up, the phrase, has a lot of different meanings. And so to help clarify this, I went on the Google, and I got some official stuff from like Urban Street stuff, and I got the 4 top definitions of hooked up, and I just want to help us, because we're going to be using that phrase a lot here, and there's some teenagers here that are in the tribe area, woo-woo, tribe, and we've got some of our other people here as well, so we've got my life group here as well, so we're going to be talking about hooked up. I don't know if you've ever heard about this, Hank, but you know, we'll give these definitions. By the way, Hank, you guys have been married, you're coming on 57 years? 56 years. Congratulations. They got hooked up a long time ago. Yeah, that's awesome. So here's the definitions of hooked up. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Number 1 is meeting someone for like an implied sexual encounter. And you hear this a lot with relationships and all that. So we hear that one. That's an obvious one. Number 2, to give or sell something that is hard to come by, whether it be like drugs, movie tickets, something like that. Like someone's going to give you the hookup in at the movie theater, get some tickets, you know. If you know someone, man, hook a brother up, you know, let me get in. If you want to go to a Yankee game, give me some tickets. That's another way to say hook up. 3rd definition, to meet someone like you haven't seen in a long time. Like, so Hank, it might be someone from elementary school, you know, back in 1903. No. But you haven't seen this guy, I haven't hooked up with him forever. So that's another way you can use the word hooked up. A 4th one is sort of the techie term for those of us on your phones. You're like, man, I can't get hooked up to this Wi-Fi. So like a digital cable thing. So there's a lot of various ways you can say that. Now, ironically, if you attended Nighttown, all 4 of those things were happening at the same time. Probably chances are someone was hooking up, someone was buying drugs, so they're exchanging some hot software, whatnot. You're getting on the Wi-Fi, and of course, you're meeting people you haven't seen in a long time. So with this series, Hooked Up, we're going to have a little bit of fun with it. But we're also going to talk about some life. There's going to be some important things going to happen. Now, like I said, my name is Donnie, and I've been a pastor now at this church for about 14, 15 years, but I've been doing ministry all the way since I was in my early 20s, so it's been a long time. And it's interesting, because I coach, I do a lot of other things, but when people hear that I'm a pastor, 2 things usually happen. One of them is like, man, I haven't been to church in a while, and you know, they start giving me excuses, and they start telling me stuff, and they stop cussing. Immediately, it's like they get all Baptist-costal. They don't know if they want to be Baptist or Pentecostal. It's like, well, brother, I know that you're a Jesus follower, and bless the Lord Jesus and God. And we're not praying, we're just talking, and they get all spiritual. But here's another thing they hear about, because I'm a pastor, and they haven't been to church in a while. They think that I'm the hookup to them with God. It's like, man, I haven't been to church in a while, but when you go, can you say a prayer for me? Can you put a good word in with the big guy upstairs? It's like, well, here's an extra $5 or $10 here. Just slide it to him, and we all know God's going to, you know, tipping God will help pass those blessings down. I'm like, that's not how it works. But it's funny because, you know, that's the people's perception about being hooked up, like in your job. And so I guess if you were a pastor, sure, I don't mind praying with you guys, praying for you guys. I love doing that. But it's a lot deeper. We got a lot more stuff to talk about. In fact, when we really talk about hooking people up or getting hooked up, it really depends on how close of a friend they are. For example, there's sort of like 3 different layers of friends, sort of like rings, if you will. They've used these examples, like we have our acquaintances, then we have our close friends, and we have family. You know, we've used this example. Even using the Wi-Fi, an example. You've got, many of you guys are logged on to Shoreline's guest account. You know, it's free, you know. Then we have our own internal, you know, production one, but there are very few get the admin ones. And the admin password is so you can change a lot of stuff, and only a few people. So there's obviously levels of proximity that matter. And I think when we look at this, I think the way we try to hook people up varies based on proximity. For example, my wife, who is not in the service right now, sinner. No, she'll come to second service. She went on a trip to go visit some family, and she had the misfortune of going through the Miami airport. Have anyone been to the Miami airport? No, not recently. Well, she had gone there, and she'd never been there before. I've been there from South Florida. I've been there a lot, especially when I was a teenager. But things have changed a lot in the 20, 30 years since I've been there. And so she'd gone there, and she had the misfortune of having one of her bags getting checked. And so she had to go run back to the baggage area to get it, then had to drive across the whole country of Miami to get to the other side of the airport. And she got there 5 minutes before the flight gates were supposed to be closed, but they opted to leave 15 minutes early. Exactly. And she's like, what? And now she's freaking out because, she's never been there. She's in this almost foreign airport because it's new to her, and she's trying to ask people for directions, and no one's really helping her. For whatever reason, it was very difficult. And she calls me, and she's emotional on the phone, and I first thing I want to try to do is I got to be the hero in this story. Yeah, it's like, I'll hook you up. So I know Miami's a little of a drive. I don't know if you know that from Destin. Those of you online, you think Florida's close, but it's 14 hours? That's a long, long drive. You take a flight to Miami. And so I was like, there's no way I can be the hero of this story, but I know someone who can be. And so my brother, who lives about an hour and a half away, lives in West Palm Beach, I called him. And since me and him are pretty close, again, he's one of those guys that will drop everything, and that's what he did. He says, you know what? I'm going to go drive down. So he drove down to the airport, picked her up, she ended up staying with family. The next day, she caught the next flight. He drove her again to the airport. I was like, I'm glad I have brothers like that. I'm glad I have people that you can call. There's people actually one call away that are in this area. There's a guy named Mike Holmes, who we love. I call him Superman because if there's any question, plumbing, electrical, Mike will sit there and, okay, have you tried this? No matter what the problem is, I can say, hey, you know what? The flux capacitor in my Lamborghini is not working. He's like, you know what? I had that problem too in 1933. And I'm like, dang, I can't stump this guy. But he's one of those guys, if my car broke down anywhere on the east coast of the country, I could call him, and if he can't fix it, someone he knows will. Again, one of those close guys. Pastor Eric Parton, I've known him now since I was in my early 20s, ever since I started youth ministry. That was 1998, 99, when I got to know Pastor Eric. And so, yeah, that's a long time. I was in my late 20s. He was in his almost 40, late 30s. Yeah, late 30s. Yeah, somewhere around there. Well, I just want to make sure I'm doing the math right. But as I started as a youth pastor, he became the person I'd go to as a mentor. And would you know, now that I'm in my 40 years, and he's on the threshold of the 60 years, he's still one of my close friends that I one call away, because I know whatever he needs, either I'll jump to it or vice versa. It's one of those cool friendships. And so again, I want to use this filter as we talk about getting hooked up, because proximity is important. Because if I got a call from an unknown number that has the Miami address, chances are I'm not answering it. When I see it's my wife's name, heck yeah. Same thing, if Pastor Eric calls, I'll pick it up. If I get one of those spam alert calls, that's okay. So proximity matters. And so I want to use these proximity rings and sort of apply a filter over finding solutions to the challenges in our lives, because I want to hook you guys up as best as I can. Also, I want to apply that same type of filter over to when we start talking about the Bible, because as a pastor, I want to use the wisdom, all the good stuff that God has so given to us. I want to hook you up with him as well. Not just a prayer. I want to do more if I can. And so with that, here are 3 rings I want to show you. Number 1, it's the outer ring. This is sort of like the multitudes that followed Christ. The people on the outside, they'd be in the stadium. This is what we call the come and see crowd. They're the ones who are just sort of checking people out. It's sort of I'm just checking this Jesus thing out. So you could be online and be one of those, I don't even believe in the God thing. I just sort of just checking out Shoreline. Or for some of you guys up in the balcony, or like I'm coming here to check out Shoreline and check out that girl over there. You're sort of mixed attention. You're sort of like, I'm checking out this, but I could be doing this. It's cool. And Shoreline actually is a great place to do that. We welcome that. We love that. Jesus had that opportunity for people to check out and come and see and follow him. We want to have that available for those online as well. But then there's the next level. Well, the next shift is what happens when people start to believe. Things happen. This is where people have questions and they feel comfortable to ask someone some questions. It could be about, what about my boyfriend or my girlfriend? Or it could even be about Jesus. Or I want to ask God questions. And I want to take a step further because it's no longer just seeing if I want to have a conversation. Now I feel comfortable, I can have a conversation. And there's many of my life group that are represented here, and many of you guys understand what it's like to feel comfortable we can have that conversation. But I want to lean a little bit further into the third ring, and I want to call this the experience ring. This is where I need a miracle. I need to get close. It's sort of like those 4 friends who had a paralytic friend, and it says, we can't just watch from the outside. We'll tear down the wall. We'll climb up a wall and tear down the roof. We want to get in proximity to Jesus because in proximity, things happen. And if there's something like, maybe some of you guys are coming to church because you want to have the experience, like, I'm in a great moment. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to get my church on, as some of my Southern Christian charismatics would say. I love that you want to experience God that way. And sometimes if you're not in the high moments of your life, you're in a down moment, you just want to get and experience God in a different, powerful way, or experience people in your group. That's a great place to be. But regardless of where you are in any of that, that's all good. It just means our conversation just has to take that into account. So your response will vary. But I'm going to hook up every single one of you guys as best as I can today, because that's my job as a pastor. Pretty much, I'm sort of like John the Baptist. My goal is to point you towards who God is and get you hooked up. In fact, I'm a matchmaker. You're welcome. Now, for those of you guys who went to Easter service with us, can I see you raise your hands? Most of you guys, all right, good, awesome, sweet. And those online, we can see those hands? Not really, but I can feel the love. But realistically, Pastor Eric did a fantastic job of one of the best Easter messages. So if you missed it, you want to make sure you find that message and watch that one back. But he talked about this guy named John the Baptist. And so what I'm going to do is going to help you guys take the next step. If this is your second time you've gone to church in a long time, we're going to work right in hand with what you just learned last week. But I want to encourage you guys, if you're just in the come and see and you're just trying to figure out this church, we're going to just talk about from the book of John. And if you ever want to read a book of the Bible or just something, it's really easy. There's an Old Testament, New Testament. In the New Testament, there's 4 stories: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jump to John because he has some really cool insight. It's this guy who has a brother. Anybody have a competitive brother? I do. Me and my brother as well. And so as he writes, I identify with John because he gets very competitive, but in a sort of a passive-aggressive way. He wants to be the favorite, and so he always mentions, like, I'm the disciple who Jesus loved. He always drops these things in there. It's very subtle. So I like it. He's pretty funny. We're going to focus on him because he had a unique experience. Due to his proximity with Jesus, has a very powerful story. And we're going to look quickly through his story. Now, the author, John, is different than John the Baptist. Two different entirely. So John is writing a narrative. We're going to look at that really quick. Now, the first book of John, the first chapter of John is actually writing about John the Baptist, the guy who sort of prepares the way for Jesus. He's sort of the one who's helping everyone get hooked up. Like, he actually had some disciples, and he sort of sent them after he was like, there's Jesus, the Lamb of God. Again, we talked about this on Easter. And so he had been working with these guys who had been discipling, and had been following John, who's been sort of like his left hand, and is like, but now that you've learned everything you got from me, now I need you to go and follow him because he is awesome. In fact, his sandals, I'm not even worthy to untie. And so he was giving all honor to Jesus. His life was pointing that way, and so many of his disciples went, which is pretty cool. If you think about it, Jesus had some people that were sort of rough, so the fishermen, tax collectors, but then he got some ringers from John that had been doing ministry out in the wilderness and had been figuring out how to set up and tear down dinners and stuff like that. So Jesus had a combination of various people from all walks of life. Some people who are passionate and some people who are still, in their own way, still on the come and see type trek. So he had the believers. He also had some come and see guys. And so that's John. That's the first chapter. And if we were to look at John the Baptist, this is his picture, and I'm sort of leaning on the chosen for pictures. If I were to put him on those 3 circles, I'd put him here. sort of near the middle. He definitely believes, he definitely experiences, but again, he's not always with Jesus, and he's sometimes has some conversations, so I'd fairly put him here. Turn to chapter 2, John 2. We find the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, many of you guys have heard of Mary, and you've heard a lot of cool stuff. There is this one story where they're at a wedding, and this is where they're captured in John 2, where they run out of wine. And who hasn't run out of wine at a wedding, really? And so, but this is a problem because Mary is like she feels bad for the host. And she goes to Jesus and said, hey, look, I know you're God, but I need you to hook us up. And of course, what did Jesus say? This is not my time. Now, this is what I love. This is where I get to be a little theologically flexible because I'm the unofficial theologian here at Shoreline. I believe Jesus wasn't going to do a miracle, but when Mary said please, and because Mary had favor with God, and Mary had that relationship, that proximity to Jesus, he's like, look, I'll make this work. Just no one say anything. And then all the ramifications, like the butterfly effect, happen. Jesus is like, I could go this way, but I'm God. I'm going to make this happen just because she asked. If you don't believe me, Jesus does special things, ask Lazarus. Jesus goes out of his way. He can rewrite the script. He's God. He's that way. It was all because of that proximity. And so Mary, we got to put her on the map. She's pretty darn close to the middle. I mean, she's got, she had conversations with the angels telling her you're highly favored. And of course, in her life, she had that proximity. So cool. That's chapter 2. Chapter 3, John 3, we hear one of the greatest scriptures that you've ever seen at a football game. Yeah. This wasn't written by Tim Tebow, contrary to what Pastor Eric says. But this is Jesus having a conversation with a religious leader who was sort of at the come and see area, but he's starting to believe. He was curious. His name was Nicodemus. And so he had some thoughts. And so Jesus actually starts answering his theological questions, deep questions that we get to benefit from now. The stuff from what is born again? And Jesus explains what he means by being born again. Why are you coming to, why is this all important? And Jesus says, well, the Son of Man had not come to disqualify people or to condemn, but I came to seek and to save. And again, Jesus is answering these powerful questions. This guy who's coming and see, so we put him on the map. So he was still deciding. That's pretty cool. He had questions. And many of you guys are in this phase. That's awesome that you're on the map. That's cool. Number 4, this is where we're going to spend some time, just a little bit of time, talking about the Samaritan woman. Now, when I hear that, I was joking with a band. It reminds me sort of that Lenny Kravitz. Samaritan woman, dun, 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 get away from me. That's what I hear in my head when I hear that. But that's just me because every time I read scripture, I hear a song track and there's something happening there. That's sort of what happens when you go to Shoreline. You hear movie quotes and soundtracks all throughout the scripture. So we're going to talk about the Samaritan woman because she's barely on the radar. You can put her on the map because she's not even thinking about Jesus. She's going on her own business, and all of a sudden Jesus crosses her path. Now, just because Jesus wasn't on her radar doesn't mean she wasn't on his. And so we're going to look from John 4. Now, taking into account all those 4 different types of stories, all relevant because they represent all the types of people here and all those of you guys online. So we're going to jump into John, my favorite competitive brother who's writing about Jesus from a very personal perspective. He starts out this in John chapter 4, verses 1. He says, now Jesus learned the Pharisees had heard what was going. Heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although, in fact, it was not Jesus who was baptizing, but his disciples. Thanks, John. Thanks for letting us know that you, keeping score, you baptized more than John the Baptist, you competitive brother. Okay. So he left Judea and went once more back to Galilee. Now he had gone through Samaria. Now he had to go through Samaria. Now you understand there was this tension between Samaria and the regular Jews, and we'll talk about that in a second. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. Now I have to pause there because you guys are wondering, who the heck is Jacob? Well, he's sort of like, if you would create a Mount Rushmore of Hebrew people, it would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those faces would be on the Mount Rushmore. And so when they mentioned this is important. This is like going to like the Washington Monument, something that's very important, especially this well. So it comes back important a little later on. You'll see this in a second. So John is setting the stage. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now you understand his disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" You guys understand that, and John wrote this, for Jews don't associate with Samaritans. Now I got to pause there. You think about this. Why not? They're sort of neighbors. Well, it's sort of like how Alabama fans and Auburn fans are neighbors, and they might even share the same bloodline and family, but there is a distinct rivalry, a distinct perspective, right? And it's like, you wouldn't ask someone who's wearing the different colors for a ride into town. You're like, "I'm good. I'll find someone else to hook me up." You know, proximity matters. You're not near me. Beat it. So she's like, "What are you doing?" Not only is that there's a cultural thing about guys talking to women, especially this is a stranger, this is a weird situation in the middle of the day. She's avoiding people to be at the middle of the day because of, as we're going to find out. So Jesus answered her. I like this. "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you'd be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh living water." I push pause there again. Jesus isn't me. This is not the contemptuous Jesus saying, "If you knew who I was, you'd give me a drink." No, that's not the Jewish Jesus who is sort of a jerk. He's actually saying, if you really understood what's about to happen, your tone would change. Then of course the woman responds, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, and as did his sons and his livestock?" Again, she's now just showing how important Jacob's name is, because this is the Mount Rushmore, and she's saying, "Are you better than our founders? Are you better than this?" And of course, Jesus answers in verse 13, "Everyone who drinks from this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become like a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Then the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I don't have to get thirsty, and I don't have to keep coming here to draw water." And he told her, "Go call your husband and come back." I'm going to push a pause button here, because some of you guys don't know this, but watering holes is a common place for people to hook up. Don't believe me? Have you been to a bar recently? Have you been to a water cooler at work? All right, and so I love the fact that Jesus actually, before things got even awkward, he clarifies this by, "Go get your husband, because there's going to be something important here." But he's also opening a conversation with her, because he's now letting her know that he knows something. Now this was before Facebook, before Tinder, before Bumble, before anything. So she's not like her profile was already floating. And so she said, "Go get your husband and come back." And then of course she says, "Well, I have no husband." And Jesus says to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, Morty Povich, please put on the board." You know, it's like, you've had more than 5 husbands, and the man you're now with is not your husband. And what you have just said is quite true. Now, I don't believe this was in a derogatory or condescending type way. I think this was the way you speak clearly to the point, the truth. Because she responds, "Sir, I can see clearly that you are a prophet." Because now she realizes we're getting past the come and see. The fact is, I believe there's something more here. There's something more that meets the eye here. And she goes on and says, "Our ancestors worshiped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." She's immediately now went from casual conversation into theological conversation. I thought that was interesting. She's now feel like this guy knows something. Let me ask him a good question, not just superficial questions. But then Jesus answers her theological with something very profound. He goes this, "Woman, if I try to do that, only Jesus can get away with that response. Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you don't know, and we worship what we do know. For salvation is from the Jews. Now, I have to pause there again. Because the reason why there was some tension between the two is because the Samaritans, they started breeding, or I hate to say we're breeding, they started marrying and starting having mixed religions come into their camp. And so a lot of the pure Pharisees and religious wanted to separate that. They wanted to get back to the basics and became very aggressive on their religious views. And so not only were they culturally different, their families were different, now their theological views were different. And so when Jesus said this, he's not slamming her. He's just saying, look, you probably don't have access to even the scrolls that we have because you have all these different other stuff that's sort of been Hellenistic, have been incorporated into your worldview. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say this important verse. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. So again, it's not where you worship, it's authenticity there. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Again, I love this because she could easily have just, all right, I'm out of here. She leans in a little bit further and says this, I know the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. I push pause here again because that is a profound statement if you think about this. Again, remember with all the blended cultures and all this stuff, somehow she understood about the Messiah. Somewhere along the line in my theology, I believe, either they had some scrolls. She somehow got this prophetic insight of who the Messiah was. It could have come from some scrolls they kept in some of the places they worshiped. It could have came from, hypothetically, one of John the Baptist's disciples could have ventured out there and sort of talked, and they sort of heard about this Jesus or this Messiah that's coming. The town could have heard of it that way. It could have been another divine inspiration where an angel says, hey, Messiah's on his way. Whatever form, somehow she had some insight that not many people hardly ever knew about. In fact, when Peter says, hey, when Jesus asked, who do you think I am? And he says, I believe you are the Son of the living God. Jesus said to Peter, what you just said is because the Father has revealed it to you, because I haven't posted that on Facebook yet. So she made a statement here that is pretty profound. There's something deeper than her story about her husbands. There's something deeper than her story about her past. There's something that's behind this. And again, God has seen her on the radar. So then Jesus declared, I, the one who's speaking to you, now, of course, I think that was for emphasis because there's no one else there. I am he. And you got to imagine at that moment, you could probably hear a pin drop. Because this is the first time Jesus outed himself. It wasn't in the temple. It was at a well with a Samaritan woman. Now, of course, in verse 27, just then the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, because now they've been around Jesus long enough, because he's talking about something. They didn't ask, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? That's powerful. Again, her proximity is getting closer and closer. They came out of the town and made their way towards him. See, here's the cool thing. The disciples, they came back with lunch. She came back with the city. There's something that is powerful if you think about that. She had just a few moments that transformed her from the come and see to believe to now I've experienced something that is deeper, that's more powerful than rumors, than the scrolls I've been reading. There's something that is life-changing, and to the point where she's like, I don't care what people think anymore. The fact that she was running to the well at the middle of the day was trying to avoid the stigma, the scorn. It's like, now it doesn't matter. In fact, I'm leaving my jars here because I'm going to come back for them. I'm going to go get people. And she became, I believe, the first female fishers of men. And I think she was probably one of the best ones. John the Baptist was pretty good. He was hooking people up. But when it came to hooking up cities, she's top on the leaderboard right now. Meanwhile, Peter, James, and John, I got Subway. And Jesus is like, dude. And I love the conversation after this. It's not in my notes, but it's on there. They're like, the people respond like, we first saw you, we thought you were crazy. It's like, all right, let's go see this guy. But now we've seen and now we believe. So she just didn't get people to come out and watch the freak show. the whole city got impacted with the message of Jesus. She was definitely someone of prominence. Now, hooking up with men, she's used to that. She understood that concept. But apparently there was something different about this situation, this hookup at the well. Now, when I was doing my study for this, often when you search, like, who's the woman at the well? Come to find out, there's a lot of people hooking up at the well. 3, in fact. One of them, you're seeing about the Samaritan woman. But let's go back to those patriarchs. Did you know Abraham decided one day, he's like, I'm about 130 years old, and my son is about 40. That's right, Abraham had some kids late. He's a late bloomer. And it's almost like Bruce, I guess the Batman character, Bruce Wayne. Imagine his father was there and he's like, I got to find a spouse for Bruce Wayne. He's my son. So Alfred, I want you to go to this city. And these are the standards I want you to find. My trusted servant, my trusted butler, my trusted friend. You find and help get Bruce Wayne someone. So his butler, we'll call him Alfred for this story. He goes over to this city and he's praying. I want to make sure I don't let my master down. Bruce is awesome. And so what can I need to do? And he prays to God and he goes to a well. And the first woman he sees, he says, can I have a drink? Sound familiar? What she do? She says, absolutely. She uses her jar, gets water out of the well, not only gives him a drink, but feeds waters all his stock. And he's like, that's the woman. Would you know that would be Rachel, who would then marry Isaac? Oh, that's an interesting point. Woman at the well, hookup. Okay, cool. I wonder after that point, people are like, is there any other rich butlers at the well? A family cycle later, this guy named Jacob, again, on the Mount Rushmore. He's looking to find finally a spouse. He's got the blessing from his father, Isaac. And he's going and saying, I'm going to go to the same city and see if there's someone else that I could fall in love with. Someone else of that caliber of Rebecca, whom my mom and dad, I want to find that image. So he goes there and goes to this well that has this huge rock on it. And apparently what happens is shepherds, they'd all gather their sheep around, and once everyone's there, they take the rock off of it because they want to protect the water and the cleanliness, and they tend to their fields, tend to their flock. So he shows up to the well on his way to the city, and he's like, anybody want to help me get this? And they're not doing anything. But all of a sudden he sees a shepherd who happens to be female, which actually was very common. She shows up, and he's like, oh my goodness. So he removes a stone by himself, and he waters all of her flock, and then tends to his flock and all that, and falls in love with this woman called Rachel. And he goes, all right, I got to go talk to her dad, Laban, because I got to figure out how to make this relationship work. There's a lot of hookups at well. And I thought this was very interesting, that the fact that Jesus started to reapproach the same conversation at the well, saying, would you give me a drink? That's very poetic. The fact that there's a lot of things hooking up at wells. But the Samaritan woman wasn't looking for just another hookup. The first thing she needed was proximity to Jesus. That was the first thing. And she recognized that because how she responded, it's like, my people need this. And so what they need to do is proximity to Jesus. So there's first things first. Here are 3 things. We're going to go through these notes really quick. There is power in proximity to Jesus. This is where miracles happen. This is where breakthrough happens. This is where people change. A lot of times people want to do a 12-step program, which I believe in, but also know there's just moments and seconds when the presence of Jesus can totally change years and years of scar tissue and hurt. I believe there's absolutely, yes, there's value in doing the process, but there's something about the presence and proximity that there is power. The second thing, there is perspective in proximity. When you get close to Jesus, you start to see people the way that he sees them. And so your behavior changes. The way you see yourself, the way you treat others, the way you treat your family, the way you treat your mom and dad, the way you treat your kids, your in-laws. Third, there is peace and proximity to Jesus. We see this on the boat where Jesus is sleeping, and people are like, how can he sleep in the middle of the storm? Dude, if you're around Jesus, he has this thing about him that he knows. In the book of Psalms, David writes that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because you're with me. In the moment of the deepest pain, you can still have peace God didn't promise us a life without pain or challenges, but he did promise us a peace that's unexplainable, the world can't take away. And so as a pastor, before we start answering the questions about, is she the right one? Is he the right one? How relationships work? I have to be like John the Baptist. Let's get first things first. I want to get you guys hooked up with Jesus. Just a little bit. Here's 3 things. This is how you can get hooked up as my pastors know. Number 1, take one step closer. No matter where you are on those 3 rings, if you're still checking out Jesus, if you're just watching online, take one step closer, whatever that means to you. Whether it's to follow up and read the book of John, whether it's to talk to someone, to ask some questions, take that step. Number 2, ask one question deeper. Don't just stay the superficial with your group or with people. There are people here after services and out in the lobby that, make yourselves available in your groups, small groups. And if you're online, you can ask questions to AG. But just don't ask how the weather is and where he's at. Ask that deeper question. Just one question deeper. Lean into it. And of course, the 3rd step here is listen 1 minute longer. That means you have to be silent for 1 minute longer. Just listen, lean into whatever that is. And maybe God has his time when he wants to show that even though Jesus may not have been on your radar when he came here or watching online, but you've been on his radar. He's been pursuing you. There's a story as the band gets ready to play. Many of you guys know my daughter. She's 14, turning 15 in like a week. And we came here, she was barely 1. She was just a little tree frog, and now she's taller than Carmen. And I love this because she's a lot like her daddy. She's a daddy's girl. And one of the things that I do to her every once in a while, because she's an introvert like her dad and mom, I'll go up and surprise her and give her a big hug and hug her. She's trying to worm out of it, half-heartedly, of course. Which is, how teenagers are. We put them in a rear naked chokehold. No, when you just put them in just a bear hug. And I always tell her, you're my favorite daughter. And of course, she quips back every time, I'm your only daughter. And I was like, that doesn't change the fact. And I said, you're my favorite one. We stopped because we figured we couldn't do any better than this. And she's like, stop it. And so there's this pushing back. And there was this, we were getting her passport renewed the other day at the courthouse. And every once in a while, I'll have to chase her around and give her a hug because sometimes she doesn't want it. But there's some times where she does one of these things. She gets close to me and does one of these. One of these things. And I playfully push, and she pushes back. Or do one of the things, she starts pushing, and I start leaning back. And it becomes this little tug of war. And I can see Carmen watching us out of a corner of her eyes, just rolling her eyes because we're making a scene in front of the courthouse, waiting for her to pay for her photo getting fixed on her passport. And we're just bopping, and she just then does one of the head things, just leans, just for a second. For teenagers, that's an eternity, when you're doing that. And I just thought about this, and sometimes we don't think God has been pursuing us, but he chases us down, wraps his arms around us, and every once in a while, I think if you were to want to experience God a little bit more deeper, it's just to lean back a little bit. Because there's those quiet moments. We don't say anything. It's just those small moments between a dad and his kid where you sort of all right, you're there. That's all I need. It's a sweet moment because we weren't talking about her ridiculous passport photo. If you want to, I would show that, but she'd be mad because it looks like a mugshot. And she actually was proud of it because she didn't want to smile. It's not because I'm not looking for perfection. In fact, perfection is not the key. Proximity to the Father is. So, as you are figuring out what does the hookup look like for you, maybe you're in a relationship where you're like, dude, I need to get some breakthrough. Proximity, man. Lean into the experience. I don't know who Jesus is. Lean in a little bit further. Take that one step further. Come back next week. I tell you what, I'm John the Baptist. I'm not worthy to untie Eric's shoes, as John said of Jesus, but Eric's going to talk about some cool stuff, about some tricky stuff about relationships you don't want to miss. But before we can talk about those things, we have to talk about the things that have the most impact. Again, a moment with Christ can save years of therapy. So let's not talk about those therapy things until we get the opportunity to understand the powerful proximity with Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this opportunity just to talk as a dad, but also as a pastor, that we get to lean a little bit. I know there's times in my life when I know I'm not perfect, but you still lean in and you find ways to embarrass me in a good way. You remind me how much you love me. And I thank you for those moments. And I thank you for those moments right now with the people online, as people are here, that we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be aware that you're doing something, and we're going to lean into it today. And Lord, I pray you give us all courage to make the step, whatever that may be, wherever we're at, that this is a week that will forever be changed because of our proximity to you. In your name we pray. Amen.